I thought, this is it. This is as big as it's going to get. I have made it to CBG. Oh my God, this is the birthplace of punk rock. The music that saved my life.
Flaming heavy metal universe where sound alone has the power to destroy everything in its path. The paradoxical figure of Randy Blythe appears on He shouts like a ferocious animal on stage. Frantic, fierce, and unforgiving, but behind the scenes, a serene man is seen talking calmly, abstaining from drugs and alcohol, constantly keeping a notebook with them to record ideas of life, death, and kindness. As the lead singer of Lamb of one of the most significant metals is God. 21st century bands Randy has faced abysses and peaks, and even the courthouse where he was previously detained Europe over a young fan's passing engulfed in his own ego's turmoil and ceaseless binges. But rather than jogging, he returned willingly and faced trial the repercussions and changed his life. From its most obscure nook, Randy is not unlike other heroes. He doesn't yell to provoke animosity, but to serve as a reminder that anger can be moral, which is why almost 30 years later on, he continues to be the only voice that the cry of a guy who is able to listen. He asked himself, how did someone once involved in a lost manslaughter charge, addicted and engulfed by aggressive steps, turn into a representation of awakening in the metal, liberty and accountability? The response, such as his scream, is not it's worth listening to even though it's simple to hear. David Randall Blythe's early years were early years, born February 21, 1971, and brought up in the land where Virginia is located. Fog-covered woods meet tiny industrial communities encased into the American South's conservative atmosphere. There was no artistic heritage in his family. He learned how to hold a microphone from one, or compose songs he learned on his own. Disobedience from the streets, from nights of insomnia brought on by vinyl recordings of Lousy Intellect and Sex Pistols that he played covertly on a vintage tape deck. His buddies, however, hoped for stable employment. Randy was a roofer and a cook. Anything he could to stay alive, but always felt uncomfortable in any mold he had previously declared. I didn't hold anyone in high regard, wished to follow anybody. I simply understood that I would burst if I didn't yell. It is paradoxical that he did not grow up with metal. Taking into account the metal frontman, he would later, when he returned, punk rock was his religion, in which singing was not required by bands. Well, to be honest, technique is not necessary. Only a Randy's voice appeared in those two chords during rebellious outbursts without cause, during evenings of complete loss of control. Without it, there was that same pandemonium. Regulations without direction or instruction which molded a young man with a rebellious ego, a fresh but unstable mind, and from the chaos, a stage director one day and a man who is prepared to assume responsibility would be born in 1995 as a young professional at the age of early professional life. 24, Randy Blythe became a member of an extremist group. Burned the priest enough of a name to make clergy angry and promoters tremble. It wasn't a calculated action, but create a rebellious response to a culture Randy didn't feel like he belonged there. Moment he had never heard from. He didn't know what to scream throughout training. Technique, Randy simply yelled with all of the unprocessed energy in his body, and that was precisely what made him unique. Nobody had Randy's voice. And even though the majority couldn't comprehend a word, they sensed the truth in it as he screamed. Burn the priest attracted notice right away. In underground culture, but as swiftly struck a wall, earning them the nickname band. Began receiving chances to perform outside of the underground. It was decided that they would alter, not to soften, but to be called the Lamb of God, their passion. But to conceal it under a moniker that oozes irony, from burning the caustic but honest priest to the Lamb of God. The audience's very successful move was they were curious, and no longer terrified. Their debut album, released under the new moniker, New the American Gospel, was captured and unadulterated. All of the vocals were laid down by Chaos Randy. Only 8 hours spent drinking beer, a little studio, and cigarette smoke essentially yelled in my throat. Remembered, but I wasn't sure what method. I only knew that I had to yell till it bled. Had no major label deal. Thus they lack of artistic direction in the media campaign, only music, anger, and an unidentified dream. But the Lamb of God sprang from that void. Made something that no one else could duplicate, unadulterated, unvarnished genuineness, and Randy, a roofing contractor who was aware how to shout, turned into the essence of everything. That intensely prosperous career from AA prosperous career named controversy in the subterranean scene from Randy Blythe's Lamb of God leadership developed into one of the top metal bands of the 21st century, standing shoulder to shoulder for a century with Slipknot, Pantera, and even being praised for the upcoming generation. The first significant milestone for Metallica came in 2004. The album Ashes of the Wake was released. Manifesto on War, Imperialism, and Music. The CD sold more copies of Righteous Anger in the United States alone, 250,000 copies, and was the band's first appearance on the Billboard 200. The song, Laid to Rest, turned into a chant against the Iraq War. But Now You've Having Something to Die For was thought to be a song of rage for a whole generation. They published Sacrament Earnings in 2006. Their initial nomination for a Grammy for The Redneck is a song that is now at number 8 on the Billboard 200, a remarkable accomplishment. This is unusual for a metal band. Beyond God's Lamb scream was reinforced by the record as more. It was a warning rather than merely a sound. Strong, purposeful, and effective, inflamed, but their anger didn't end there. Resolution 2012 and Resolution 2009 extended the success of the band's international tours, selling arenas throughout the US, Europe, and South. Lamb of God headlines in Asia and America important events such as Download UK Germany, Hellfest France, Rock am Ring, and Randy from Ozfest USA was more than just a frontman. He influenced the development of his artistic personality. Lyrics, whether they are religious, political, or introspection, is constantly encouraged. He once said in a conversation, I yell to let out my frustration and to make people examine oneself." Beyond the Lamb of God, Randy became a highly sought-after partner, providing vocals for a variety of bands. The Way of All, Gojira, Adoration for None, Overkill, Skull and Bones, Soulfly and Flesh, Dead Clutch, Suicide Behind the Eyes, Body Count of Silent Devil, Drivers and more. Randy was picked not only for his unique voice, but for his authoritative presence, as though he were bearing the burden of truth with each yell. Throughout his career as well expanded into music and movies, metal and other documentaries. The working class journey of Ad Banger, the zen of screaming, and rock star. Even started acting, making an appearance in The Starring in Graves, 2009, and more recently in a Taiwanese metal action movie Bandic. From a guy who yelled at Endure, Randy became a representation of screaming with intelligence and soul as art form. But at the height of his abilities, when a fall arrived, no stage could have prepared him for a fan's passing and in worldwide trial for the incident in Prague. The arrival of Randy Blythe on June 27, 2012, Czech Republic's Prague, where Lamb of After 2 years, God was scheduled to perform. Absence. But as soon as he got off the aircraft, there was already an armed police squad waiting. There was no lawyer, no notice, and no trial. Randy was handcuffed and transported directly to the station. He faced manslaughter charges. 2 years prior, at a performance at the tiny Prague Abaton Club, a fan named Daniel Nosk, 19, had entered the stage several times. On one of those days, Randy was accused of should have shoved him into the mob. Noah stumbled backward and hit his head. The ground slipped and lost consciousness. Went into a coma and passed away a few weeks later. None of the band members were aware of the incident. Nobody got in touch with them until that day. Randy was held at the airport at Pankrak prison for 37 days. Building constructed in the 1800s, once utilized to hold political prisoners in accordance with the Nazi government in dark days, His autobiographical, according to him, the institution had barbed wire, decaying walls, and an ancient clock is the sole representation of at that precise moment. He had the option to what a lot of artists might run away from extradition. However, Randy decided to return willingly to Prague in order to stand trial without being required by law, yet for personal reasons. He stated, "I can't scream about accountability and then flee when it's appropriate to accountable." The trial was held in February. On the witness stand in 2013, Randy said he was pushing a fan off the stage. Didn't realize the fan was actually the trial in Prague hurt. He stated in court that he had inadequate eyesight, did not wear spectacles while acting, and believed Knock was the individual who had twice approached him previously. He thought the crowd would catch him as they had done hundreds of times previously. However, on March 5, none did this time. The Prague City Court decided in 2013 that Randy, although Blythe was not held criminally responsible, he had a moral obligation to care for Daniel. Knock's death was primarily caused by insufficient security, and the organizers' no stage or barricades were present. The prosecution appealed the control staff. However, the Czech Supreme Court maintained that Randy's decision in June of that year went back to the United States without his head held in high regard, without any triumphant. "Just a tired man thinner," he said. More subdued in a subsequent interview, he stated, "Although I'm not a murderer, I was on that stage on that day. I can see why my family is suffering, and I'm not requesting, I simply want to live in accordance with forgiveness. I give this case a paradoxical scream." And agonizingly changed Randy Blythe. It changed him from a fierce frontman to becoming an artist who is conscious, and from that his life took a different turn at one point. No longer driven by ego, drink, or crazed, a route that veered inward, starting with a man falling on a stage and never resurrected. Following the resurrection, Randy Blythe returned to the Prague trial. To America has changed. He used to shout it in defiance of every authority, even himself, but after the religious battle, standing above a fan in the courtroom death, he discovered for the first time how to remain quiet, to listen quietly, to don't be the guy who writes in silence. Cried out for the world, but the individual who he asked himself. Randy published his autobiography, Dark, in 2015. Days is a book created from personal experience. Spend 37 days behind bars for episodes of melancholy as well as the return trip from the edge. There was no extravagance, no acting victim, a confession was made, and a self-healing in which he acknowledged his errors without justifications and didn't avoid the suffering of others. At the same moment, Randy entirely abstained from drinking, the very material that had pursued him each journey through each tumultuous turn of. He chose sobriety in his youth, not for picture, but for survival of. Several friends and colleagues, singers, metal bandmates have perished due to he was still alive despite his addiction, and he desired for that life to have some significance. I once believed that pain was art, but now I think that consciousness produces anything that lasts longer than discomfort. So a new Randy came out of it, no longer engulfed by a different Randy. He screamed in meaningless wrath. Someone now started a blaze on stage. Completely conscious of the repercussions of each move, each and every phrase and every conversation with, he started meditating with another human. Writing in a journal each morning and talking regarding interview stoicism, not as an academic, but as a man who once thought he was untouchable and then understood how easily he might be broken. In 2020, Randy and Brewdog collaborated to introduce an alcohol-free beer known as Ghost Walker, based on the Ghost Walking song written at the beginning of his life. Absent stimulants, it wasn't merely a product. It represented rebirth, and Randy published his second book by 2025. It's calmer and deeper, just beyond the light. Almost a journal kept by someone who meditates, who had traversed the shadows in its pages. He didn't shout or lecture, but just mumbled. Life is not something to regulate, but something to hear. Listen to what it's attempting to convey in the quiet. From a frontman who was before known, Randy Blythe is known for his fiery cursing. Someone who is still capable of screaming, but then take a step back, grinning, and state, "I don't mind, no longer need to win, I just need to be genuine." Global impact and legacy of metal, where anger is valued as a kind of. Randy Blythe did something with his natural power. Nobody anticipated that he transformed his rage into ethics rather than the vacuous performative assigned compassionate, but with a knowledge-based moral code, the results of your behavior being aware of other people's suffering and yet having the courage to say the actually. Randy isn't a representation in that he doesn't sing in the conventional sense. By classical standards, he is lovely. Has never had a timeless ballad, radio charting success, but he made something much more persistent, an unflinching devotion from the international metal scene. Randy is more than simply the voice of, he is the spokesperson for a Lamb of God. A generation that feels excluded, misinterpreted, and miscalculated. As a musician, he has influenced more than 10 studios. LPs include classics such as Ashes of the Resolution of Wake, Sacrament, Wrath, and Lamb of God 2020. A record that signified the band's stirring comeback following a lengthy pause. He is the main lyricist for the group, transforming the Lamb of God from merely a yelling machine into a creative revolt with purpose and consideration. As a colleague to whom he has contributed popular bands such as Overkill, Devil, and Gojira, whereas the Soulfly Driver, Body Count, Clutch. His voice not only featured, but despite the song's weight, it was presence, not just guest work. Randy is a unique writer in the extreme metal that is capable of translating the screaming language and literature. Not only is Dark Days a memoir, but it's also a confession as an integrity manifesto appreciated by publications such as Rolling Stone. Kerrang! As incredibly human, and nowadays, the book is considered a literary masterpiece. Evidence of suffering and truth. As a seeker, Randy is now seen as a representation of healing. Live evidence that rocks don't possess to lead to addiction in a single direction, and the process of self-destruction can be a journey toward the light if the creator is in possession of bravery to adapt, and ultimately what current situation provides Randy Blythe with his enormous influence is not a media method, sales figures, or the spotlight. It's simpler. He lived in accordance with what no running, no blaming, he yelled. Acting as though there were a lot of artists conceal oneself behind the personalities, Randy went ahead and declared, "I'm real, I've been incorrect, but I am not a false person." And that above he is trusted and appreciated for everything else, and will be heard for a very long time. His scream is muffled by the current quiet. Randy Blythe's life in his 50s is not lengthier. The person who appears at the top of every bulletin from Metal News, but to those who genuinely follow him, he's a living man now. More thoroughly than before, despite the stage the lights have gone out on. God's Little Lamb continues to release their most recent album. Omens 2022 was highly praised, not only for its strong sound but also for its war political lyrics that are urgent and current: separation, climate change, and group. This wasn't just another instance of moral deterioration. The metal record served as a foreboding caution. Now delivered in shrill grumble, more acute, more aware, and more in 2023, Randy will be more expressive than ever. Resurfaced alongside the legendary Avant Pigface, the 1990s industrial supergroup Up, what began as a few appearances by guests become a full-length tour just because it seemed too right and was too much joy. As he stated, this moment is no longer motivated by victory, he now plays for fun. As a creator who has experienced both the peaks and valleys of existence in the same year that he carried on his second book on his literary trip, 2025 saw the release of Just Beyond the Light. Shifted away from stories about jail or insurrection as well as into silent reflections on it, was distinguished by time, life, death, and awakening. A new era with more shouting and less. Randy has been listening more than writing. Engaged in instructing artistic speaking at conferences and taking pictures on meditation for mental health, and he doesn't cower when it comes to addiction recovery. From his history instead, use it as living evidence of the ability to fall hard and continue if they are willing to face. What's amazing about them is that Randy and his fan have a close relationship. Community without using gaudy social media appearances, but via book signings, quiet blogs, modest get-togethers, really a kind of relationship that is genuine at 50 for Randy, but not loud. Blythe has nothing further to